She set the ring on the table like it weighed nothing. It didn't, technically. 1.5 carats, platinum band, the kind of ring that women in magazines press against their chests and cry happy tears over. Isabel Whitmore had done exactly that 4 years ago on the rooftop of a restaurant in downtown Chicago, where the skyline looked like someone had scattered diamonds across black velvet. She had pressed it to her chest. She had cried. Now she set it down on the marble kitchen island and listened to the sound it made. A small click. Like a period at the end of a sentence. "I think you should keep it," Kenneth said from across the counter. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his phone, scrolling through something with his thumb, like this was a conversation happening in the background of his real life. "I don't want it," Isabel said. He shrugged. "Sell it then, or donate it." "I really don't care, I really don't care." She had replayed those 4 words so many times in the weeks that followed that they stopped sounding like words at all. They became a sound, a frequency, something her body just learned to carry around. Kenneth Hale was 39 years old, the kind of handsome that reads well in photographs and poorly in person once you know him. He was the senior VP of acquisitions at a real estate development firm. He wore custom shirts and drove a car that cost more than Isabel's first salary and said things like we need to be intentional about our future, when what he actually meant was, "I have already made a decision without you." The decision, in this case, was Renata Vasquez, 26, a commercial photographer who had shot the firm's last 3 annual reports. Isabel had even commented on the quality of one of those photos. A wide-angle shot of a lakefront property with the light hitting the water at that particular angle that makes everything look more expensive than it is. "Beautiful work," she had said at a dinner party, directly to Renata's face. Renata had smiled and thanked her and refilled her wine glass. That was 8 months before Kenneth sat across from Isabel in their kitchen and said, with genuine calm, that he thought they had grown in different directions. Isabel was 37 years old. She was an architectural historian, which is the kind of job people find impressive until they realize it doesn't pay like an investment banker and doesn't come with a business card anyone recognizes. She had spent the last 4 years building a life inside Kenneth's world. His dinner parties, his colleagues, his penthouse in Lincoln Park, his particular vision of what a couple was supposed to look like. She had loved him. She had also, she realized later, slowly disappeared inside that love, the way a photograph left in sunlight will fade until you can barely make out what it used to show. She signed the separation agreement on a Tuesday in March. The attorney, a brisk woman named Patricia, had walked her through each page with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times and felt nothing. Kenneth sat on the other side of the conference table looking slightly bored. He had already moved most of his things out. Isabel signed her name 6 times and didn't cry, which surprised her. She had expected to cry. She had rehearsed the crying, almost, had imagined herself falling apart in that sterile conference room with its pale wood furniture and framed abstract prints. Instead, she felt a strange clarity, the way the world looks after a long storm has passed through and washed everything clean and cold. She didn't know, walking out of that building and into the sharp March wind off Lake Michigan, that she was 12 weeks pregnant. She found out 4 days later, a Thursday. She had been tired for weeks, the kind of bone-deep tired she'd attributed to stress and grief and the logistical nightmare of separating a life from another life. She bought the test at a drugstore 3 blocks from the apartment she'd rented in Wicker Park, a second-floor unit with good light and a radiator that clanged, and a view of a courtyard where someone had planted a small ornamental pear tree that was just beginning to bud. She sat on the bathroom floor for a long time afterward. The thought that came first was not fear. It was something stranger, a kind of fierce and terrifying joy that she immediately distrusted, the way you distrust something good when everything around you has just collapsed. "This isn't yours to be happy about yet," she told herself. "You don't know what this is yet." She called Kenneth the next morning. She had written out what she wanted to say on a notepad first, like she used to do before difficult presentations. Bullet points. She had never felt more absurd in her life. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "I need to tell you something," she said. There was a pause, a long one. "Then are you serious right now?" "Not a question. A statement." "Yes," she said. She heard him exhale. In the background, something was playing, music or a television, she couldn't tell. We just signed the papers. I mean. He stopped. She waited. What are you going to do? She had not expected that to be his first question. She had prepared for surprise, for confusion, for concern. She had not prepared for the way that question landed. Like he was already making clear that whatever decision came next was entirely her problem to solve. What are you going to do? Not, what are we going to do? Not, are you okay? I'm going to have the baby, she said. Silence. Kenneth, I heard you. His voice had gone flat. Look, we can talk about support, whatever the lawyers need to do. But I want you to know that Renata and I are, this is serious. I'm not going to be able to. He trailed off, and she understood. She understood exactly what he was not able to finish saying. She hung up without responding. The following months were the kind that don't look like survival while you're inside them. They only reveal themselves as survival later, in retrospect, the way you can only see the shape of a mountain from a distance. The apartment in Wicker Park became her entire world. She worked from home, consulting for a preservation nonprofit, writing assessments of historic buildings that nobody outside the field cared about, and that paid just barely enough to cover her rent, her groceries, and the growing stack of prenatal supplements on her bathroom shelf. She ate cereal for dinner more nights than she would ever admit to anyone. She cried in the shower so she wouldn't have to hear herself cry. Her sister Colette drove up from Indianapolis twice. She brought casseroles and strong opinions and a specific kind of love that expressed itself mostly through doing dishes without being asked. She didn't say "I told you so" about Kenneth, which was the greatest gift she could have offered. "You're going to be okay," Colette said one evening, sitting across from Isabel at the small kitchen table. It was February. The courtyard outside was gray and bare, and the ornamental pear tree looked like it had given up entirely. "I know," Isabel said. "Do you?" "No." Colette laughed, a short, real laugh, and reached across the table and covered Isabel's hand with hers. "You always were the honest one." She met him on a train, the Blue Line, heading toward the Loop. It was a Saturday in early April, 5 months along, and she had made the mistake of trying to carry a tote bag full of research materials, plus a canvas grocery bag, plus her coat, because she had misjudged the warmth of the day. She was wedged between a pole and a man in headphones, who kept unconsciously expanding his elbows. And the train lurched, and one of her bags slipped and hit the floor, and the contents of her grocery bag went in 3 directions across the floor of the train car. She made a sound, not a word, just a sound, and bent down, which at 5 months pregnant in a moving train is an act of genuine physical commitment, and she was reaching for a rolling orange when a hand got there first. Not her hand. "Here," said the man across the aisle. He was already gathering things. The orange, a can of chickpeas, a bruised apple, moving with the unhurried efficiency of someone who simply saw a problem and handled it without fanfare. He handed them back to her one by one. Dark jacket, maybe early 40s, a face that was kind rather than striking. He had a paperback book tucked under one arm. "Thank you," Isabel said. "Sure." He sat back down. He opened his book. That was it. She had expected. She wasn't sure what she had expected. She turned back toward the window. The train moved through the underground dark. At the next stop, the man in headphones got off, and the car thinned out and there was more room to breathe. Isabel shifted her bags. The orange rolled again. The man across the aisle caught it without looking up from his book. She laughed. She hadn't meant to. It came out surprised, a short, bright sound, the kind of laugh that escapes before you can decide whether the situation warrants one. He looked up. He smiled. "Third time's going to cost you," he said. "Fair," she said. He introduced himself when they reached the Clark Lake stop, and she was wrestling her coat back on. "Patrick Okafor." He said it simply, without offering anything else, the way people do when they're not trying to sell you a version of themselves. She said, "Isabel." He nodded. Then, as people were filing toward the doors, "The farmer's market on Green Street is good on Saturdays, in case you're heading somewhere for groceries." "I'm not," she said, "but thank you." He nodded again and stepped off the train, and she watched him walk through the platform crowd until the doors closed. She didn't see which direction he went. She thought about the way he'd caught that orange without looking, like reflexes trained to pay attention to what's happening around him, even when he's absorbed in something else. She didn't see him again for 3 weeks. When she did, it was at the Green Street Farmers Market. She had not gone because of what he said. She had gone because it was a beautiful Saturday, and she had been spending too much time inside, and her midwife had told her to walk more. She was standing at a table of heritage tomatoes. Slightly absurd to be buying tomatoes in April in Chicago, but here they were. Someone had grown them somewhere warmer and driven them north. When she heard a voice say her name in the tone of mild, genuine surprise, that means someone wasn't expecting to see you and is actually glad they did. Isabel. Patrick Okafor was standing 2 feet away, holding a paper bag of something leafy and looking at her with the particular expression of a person who doesn't perform reactions. "The train orange woman," he added, which made her laugh again. Same surprised short sound. They walked the market together for 45 minutes without really deciding to. He was a vascular surgeon, he mentioned at some point, at Northwestern, which explained the reflexes and probably several other things. He had grown up in Maryland, moved here for his residency, never left. He asked about her work and actually listened to her answer, which she had stopped expecting from people. He did not mention her pregnancy in a loaded way. He didn't ask intrusive questions or make the particular face, somewhere between sympathy and alarm, that strangers sometimes made when they noticed. He just talked to her like a person. At the end of the market, she said, "I didn't come here because of what you said on the train." He said, "I know. The tomatoes are the reason people actually come." She bought 2 of them. They were excellent. She did not think of it as falling in love at the time, partly because she was 7 months pregnant, and her entire interior life was reorganized around the reality of what was about to happen to her body and her future. Partly because Patrick Okafor moved at a pace she had no template for. Patient, without urgency, present in a way that didn't demand anything in return. They had coffee. Then dinner. He called when he said he would call and didn't manufacture drama, and never once made her feel like a project he was managing. Colette on a Sunday phone call said, "You sound different." "I'm tired," Isabel said. "That's not it." Kenneth, for his part, had been largely absent in exactly the way he'd telegraphed he would be. His attorney had arranged for a modest monthly support amount. Modest was a gentle word for it, a word chosen by someone trying not to say the word insulting, and Kenneth himself had sent 2 text messages in 4 months. Both were procedural. One asked about the due date for insurance paperwork purposes. She had not told him what her OB had told her at the 22-week scan. Twins. She had sat in the exam room with the ultrasound image and stared at it for a long time. The technician, a calm young woman named Sophie, had said, 2 strong heartbeats, and Isabel had said, "Okay," very quietly, and then said nothing else for several minutes. 2. There had been a twin hiding behind the other at the earlier scan, a late reveal, tucked and turned and apparently committed to being a surprise. Isabel sat with that knowledge for a week before she told anyone. She told Colette first. Colette said, "Oh my God," and then immediately said, okay, what do you need?" She told Patrick on a Tuesday evening walk along the lakefront path. She said it the same way you say most difficult things, quickly, before you can make it bigger than it is. "They found a second one," she said. "At the scan." He stopped walking, looked at her. "Twins." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. She had learned in the months of knowing him that his silences were not gaps. They were consideration. He was actually thinking about what to say before he said it. "That's a lot," he said finally. "Yes. Are you scared?" "Terrified," she said. He nodded. He started walking again. After a few steps he said, "Good scared or bad scared?" She thought about it. The lake was black and moving beside them. "Mostly good. Then you're going to be fine." She didn't know yet how much she was going to need to remember him saying that. The twins arrived on a Thursday in late June, 7 weeks early and small in the way that early babies are small. Fierce and alert, and so completely themselves that Isabel wept the first time each of them was placed against her chest. A different cry than she had ever cried before, something more elemental. The NICU nurses were efficient and kind in the manner of people who have learned to hold space for every possible kind of moment. Isabel lay in the narrow hospital bed at 3 in the morning, with her phone dark on the table beside her, and listened to the monitors, and understood something that she couldn't have articulated, but felt in her chest like an anchor dropping. I am not alone in this. She had also meant something larger. She named them Henry and June. Henry for her grandfather, June for the month that shouldn't have been their month, but was. They were in the NICU for 18 days. Patrick visited on the evenings he wasn't on call, bringing food she actually wanted to eat and sitting beside her without needing to fill the quiet. The NICU nurses started greeting him by name sometime around day 4. She called Kenneth when the twins were born. She felt he should know, on some level, not because she owed him the information, but because the information was about people who were, biologically, his. The call went to voicemail. She left a brief message. He texted back 9 hours later. Glad they're healthy. Let the attorneys handle next steps. Colette, listening to this on speakerphone from Indianapolis, said something Isabel had not heard her sister say in 15 years of knowing her. Henry and June came home on a Tuesday in July, in matching hats that Colette had knitted, pale green, slightly uneven, genuinely made with love and limited knitting skills. Isabel had rearranged the second bedroom of the Wicker Park apartment into a nursery that was too small but was also theirs. Painted a soft, warm color, with a second-hand rocking chair, she had reupholstered herself over 3 long weekends with YouTube tutorials and considerable cursing. The first week at home was the hardest thing she had ever done. She did not romanticize it later, the way some people do. It was exhausting and frightening, and she made mistakes. And the nights were long, and she cried on the bathroom floor 3 separate times for reasons that had nothing to do with sadness, and everything to do with her body and brain running entirely on empty. Patrick was there when she let him be. Colette took 2 weeks off work. Isabel's mother flew in from Phoenix and was helpfully present in the ways that mattered, and quietly absent in the ways that would have made things worse. She survived it. They all did. Kenneth filed for joint custody in September. She was standing in the kitchen when she got the call from her attorney, a compact and extremely focused woman named Sandra, who delivered information the way you set down a loaded tray, carefully, without sudden movements. He's filed a petition for joint custody, Sandra said, physical and legal. Isabel set down the bottle of formula she was holding. He hasn't met them, she said. I know. He has never seen them. He didn't visit the hospital. He didn't. She stopped. Breathed. He texted me. After they were born. He texted. I know, Sandra said again. That's going to be relevant. Isabel leaned against the counter and stared at the ceiling, which had a water stain in one corner, shaped vaguely like a running figure. She had looked at that stain approximately 400 times in the past several months, and had never once felt what she felt now. A cold, very clear, very specific anger that had nothing to do with hurt and everything to do with the particular outrage of being told that something you carried alone, suffered through alone, and built from nothing is suddenly someone else's claim. She called Patrick that evening. She didn't cry when she told him, which surprised her again. She had cried less than she expected to, all through this year. She wondered sometimes if she had simply used up some reserve of crying in those early months and now operated differently. He waited this long, Patrick said. Not a question. 4 months. Okay. A pause. What does Sandra say? That I have a strong case. That the documentation, the texts, the absence at the hospital, the support amount, all of it tells a story. It does, Patrick said. What do you need? That. That was the question. Not what is he going to do, or are you scared, or this is unbelievable. Just, what do you need? She thought about Kenneth asking, what are you going to do in that flat voice in that kitchen 18 months ago? And she thought about the distance between those two questions, about how much territory lies between them, how different a life can look, depending on which one the people around you think to ask. I need it to be over, she said. I need him to not be able to do this. Then, let's make that happen. The custody case moved with the particular slow grind of the family court system, through autumn and into winter. Sandra was thorough and methodical, and occasionally devastating, in the way she assembled the factual record of Kenneth's absence into a shape that the judge could read clearly. Kenneth's attorneys made arguments about good faith and changed circumstances, and his sincere desire to be present going forward, which Sandra listened to with the expression of someone who has heard this particular performance many times and knows exactly how it ends. Isabel prepared her documentation the way she'd once prepared academic papers, rigorously, without gaps. Every text message time-stamped, every voicemail, the hospital log showing he was not there, the support payment records. the signed separation agreement with his attorney's notes about the pregnancy. She was not a victim presenting her suffering. She was a woman who had kept records because she had understood, somewhere underneath the shock of that first phone call, that she was going to need them. Kenneth's attorneys tried at one point to introduce the argument that her relationship with Patrick represented an unstable domestic environment. That this new person in her children's lives was unknown and potentially disruptive. Isabel had expected this. Sandra had expected it more. The response was methodical. Patrick's professional record, his references, the statements from the NICU nurses who had watched him sit with those babies through the small hours, the pediatrician who noted his presence at well visits. The portrait that emerged was not of an unknown. It was of someone who had been quietly, consistently there. The judge issued his ruling in January. Primary physical custody to Isabel. Supervised visitation only for Kenneth, at a pace to be established through mediation, subject to review. She heard the ruling and felt, not triumph, something quieter than triumph, something that felt like standing on ground that doesn't move. She did not run into Kenneth socially for 8 months after the ruling. When she did, it was at an architecture preservation gala in March, the kind of event she used to attend with him on his arm. She was there because the nonprofit she consulted for had received an award, and because she had found a dress that made her feel like a person who had lived through a great deal and come out the other side, still capable of wearing something beautiful. She had her hair the way she used to wear it before she got too tired to care, and she'd borrowed earrings from Colette that caught the light. Patrick was beside her. He had learned over the past year and a half to navigate these rooms. The particular social performance of Chicago's philanthropic circles, the careful conversations, the wine that costs more than it should. He wasn't from this world. He didn't pretend to be. He was just himself, and people liked him for it, which she had long ago decided said more about them than about him. She saw Kenneth before he saw her. He was across the room near the bar, with Renata beside him. They looked like what they were, a couple performing ease. Renata was in something silver that photographed well. Kenneth was scanning the room with the particular expression of a man in his late 30s who is working harder than usual to appear relaxed. Then he saw her. She watched it move across his face, the recognition, then the recalibration, then something she could not entirely name. He looked from her to Patrick, to the empty space where the babies weren't. They were home with her mother, who had flown in for the weekend, and back to her. She did not smile. She did not look away either. She simply stood where she was, in the dress and the borrowed earrings, and let him look at what she had built from the rubble of what he had decided she wasn't worth. Patrick said something to the colleague beside him, and then returned his attention to her, hand light at her back. "You okay?" he said, low. "Yes," she said. And she was exactly okay. She didn't cross the room toward Kenneth. She didn't need to. He crossed toward her, eventually, the gravitational pull of guilt, she supposed, or the need to demonstrate to Renata that this was a manageable encounter. He stopped a few feet away and said, "Isabel, you look well," with the stiff warmth of a man reading from a script. "Thank you," she said. He glanced at Patrick, a question forming that he didn't quite ask. "This is Patrick," she said. "Patrick Okafor." The two men shook hands. Kenneth said something polite and noncommittal. Patrick said something equally polite and entirely genuine, which is a distinction that reads clearly in the face if you know how to look. Then Kenneth said, and she had not expected this, "How are they, the kids?" She looked at him for a moment, thought about the voicemail, the text, the attorney, the custody filing, the absence, the months. "They're wonderful," she said. "Henry started crawling last week. June figured out how to clap." Something moved across his face that she chose not to analyze. "That's great," he said. He stopped. "Good." She nodded. "Excuse us," she said, and she turned, and Patrick steered them gently toward the other side of the room where the award recipients were gathering, and she breathed in and breathed out and let the rest of it go. She didn't let all of it go. That would be a different story, the kind with a cleaner ending and a more instructive lesson. What she did was more ordinary. She kept going. She worked. She renegotiated her consulting rate upward twice. She moved the four of them, herself and Henry and June, and eventually Patrick, though that transition was gradual and earned, into a larger apartment in Andersonville with a backyard, where she planted a garden that was partly ornamental and partly vegetables, and entirely more work than she'd accounted for. Which was fine because she had learned something about things that are more work than expected. Patrick proposed on a Sunday morning in that backyard in September, with both kids in the grass nearby conducting experiments on a garden snail, when the light was doing something particular to the leaves of the apple tree she'd planted in April. He said her name, and she turned from where she'd been crouched in the dirt, and he was standing there with a ring that was nothing like the ring Kenneth had given her. Not because it was less, but because it was chosen entirely differently, for a different kind of woman, by a man who had spent 18 months actually learning who that woman was. She said yes before he finished the sentence. Henry, unimpressed, returned to the snail. She thought, sometimes, about the moment in that conference room when she had signed her name 6 times and felt that strange cold clarity, and how she had not known what she was walking toward. You can't know that, you only know what you're leaving. What comes after is built in the dark, quietly, from whatever you brought with you and whatever you find along the way. She had brought her name, her work, a capacity for love that had, it turned out, not been used up, only stored, waiting for the right conditions to grow. Henry and June were 2 years old the spring that Patrick officially adopted them. The courthouse paperwork was brief and procedural and completely changed everything. Afterward, they took the kids for ice cream and walked along the lakefront in the April wind. And Isabel held Henry on her hip and watched June toddle with absolute determination toward the water's edge, and felt something she would struggle to name later if someone asked her to. Not triumph, not vindication. Something simpler. This is where she was supposed to end up. The road here was not the road she would have chosen. But she was here, in the wind, with the lake doing what lakes do. Indifferent and beautiful and enormous. And the life she had built from nothing surrounded her on all sides. She thought about the ring she had set on the marble countertop 3 years ago. The small click it made. A beginning she understood now. Not an end. Just a period at the end of one sentence, before the next one started.